Over in Japan, Heatwave Arena is about to drop. And Heatwave Arena, for those outside of Japan, will be part of the Destined Rivals set. And now that we have all of the Heatwave Arena cards, let's go and look at the last few that we haven't seen yet, some of which I think have a lot of potential. I'm Jet from inthirdperson.com. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's look at this final round of Heatwave Arena cards. Yanmega EX is a stage 1 with 280 HP. So, yep, that's kind of what you expect for stage 1. Its attack Jet Cyclone for 3 grass and a colorless is very expensive, especially for only 210 damage, and you have to move 3 energy from this Pokemon to one of your bench Pokemon. So now you can't attack with this again? But just looking at that, you'd think like this card's not very good until you see its ability Buzz Boost, where once during your turn, when this Pokemon moves from your bench to the active spot, you can search your deck for up to 3 basic grass energy and attach them to this Pokemon, then shuffle your deck. Oh my goodness, 3 energy from the deck, no less? That's absolutely nuts. And maybe the attack Jet Cyclone, it's okay. You're going to be knocking out stuff like Teal Mask Ogerpon and Pheasantipede EX. You're not going to be getting any of the big multi-prize attackers with this, but 3 energy from the deck is insane, especially if you get to move it off to some other attackers in the game. And they don't even necessarily have to be grass attackers. Just off the top of my head, something like Iron Hands EX could now go in a grass deck because Yanmega just moves all of that energy to Iron Hands. And if you've got multiple Yanmegas set up or you're evolving into them, you can get a ton of energy on the board really fast, and that just opens the door for a lot of different deck building possibilities, whether you're trying to build just a straight up Yanmega EX deck and then you just Turo the Yanmega over and over again, so you're doing a consistent 210 while your opponent just isn't able to knock them out. That could be kind of cool, but I do think there's a lot of opportunities to move that energy around to power up other types of attackers. Ethan's Pinsir is a grass Pokemon, which is a little odd considering the deck is mostly fire-based, but it does have a colorless attack here in 1 point return. For 3 colorless energy, it does 70 damage, and if any of your Ethan's Pokemon were knocked out by damage from an attack from your opponent's Pokemon during their last turn, this attack does 100 more damage. So 170 damage total, and that's pretty good for a single prize attacker, knocking out smaller EX Pokemon like a Squawkabilly EX, hitting Charizard EX for weakness, so that's kind of nice. We can power this up with the new Ho-Oh EX, but we could also power this up potentially with the new Yanmega EX, which isn't an Ethan's Pokemon. Definitely gives us some stuff to think about, especially since this is a colorless energy attack. So curious to see what people do with this one. Shaman's kind of a big deal. It has the ability Flower Curtain, where it prevents all damage done to your bench Pokemon without a rule box by attacks from your opponent's Pokemon. This sounds pretty similar, but not exactly the same as what we've seen before. We have seen a similar ability on Manaphy, which is about to rotate out, that protects the bench. Bench Barrier Mew had this, and I think Mr. Mime was another card that just like protected the bench without any sort of restrictions. Now, Shaman is the first one that does have a qualifier to it. You're not going to be able to protect any rule box Pokemon, so your EX Pokemon, your Mega Evolutions will still get hit. And I think in the grand scheme of things, that's probably overall better for the game. It can be like Manaphy, every deck had Manaphy and just slap it down, and it can be kind of oppressive to those bench sniping decks where like you really have to target the Manaphy or you're screwed. But Shaman, I think, is a little more reasonable, where it's great at protecting those single prize evolution Pokemon, but the EX Pokemon are fair game to get sniped. I guess except for the Terra Pokemon, which have their own built-in bench barrier, which is really annoying, but Shaman will outlive those Terra Pokemon, so there is that factor as well. So overall, I do like the balance of this bench barrier, even though it is technically worse than what we got with Manaphy, but being able to still snipe out those EX Pokemon, I think, is overall better for the game. One other major caveat to this card is that it has 80 HP, which means we can't use it with Buddy Puffin. We can't just use Buddy Puffin to get it out. We're going to need Nest Ball or some other way of searching this out, which is kind of annoying, also kind of worse than Manaphy. But I also do think that overall, this is probably a better balance for the game to make sure that you don't necessarily just have that super easy slap it on the board and now you can't get bench sniped. So really like this card. Crustle is a card that gets a lot better with the announcement of Flygon EX. Its Great Scissors attack for a grass and 2 colorless does 120 damage, and this attack's damage isn't affected by any effects of your opponent's active Pokemon, so you got a little bit of a shred attack here. And then its ability is very strong. Mysterious Stonehouse, where it prevents all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from your opponent's Pokemon EX. These walling Pokemon can be very tough to deal with. I think that the closest comparison to this Crustle is probably Aegislash, but Aegislash is a stage 2. This is a stage 1, and now we technically have a partner that could go with this in the Yanmega EX, where you start with the Yanmega, and then you switch all that energy onto the Crustle, and then move Crustle in to swing for consistent damage while also not being able to get hit by Pokemon EX. So definitely some strategies that could be used for this Crustle card, looking a lot better than when I first saw this before the Yanmega EX, because 3 energy is a lot to get onto a single prize Pokemon that's a stage 1, and the Yanmega does change it where this actually could be playable. Hydrapple EX has the attack Hydra Breath. For 1 grass energy, you discard 6 basic energy from your hand in order to knock out your opponent's active Pokemon. If you can't discard 6 basic grass energy in this way, this attack does nothing. Now, getting 6 energy in hand in the first place is actually not that bad. For grass decks, we do have Earthen Vessel, which can get us 2 energy, and then we also have Bug Catching, the Bug Catching set in the current format right now, which can grab grass energy or Pokemon. So getting to 6 isn't necessarily the worst thing. I think it's going to be hard, but there are definitely ways to make that climb easier. And then once you discard that energy, you could be playing stuff like Superior Energy Retrieval, Regular Energy Retrieval in order to get those back. And I think this card becomes even better in a format when Mega Evolution Pokemon come in, because at that point you're doing this attack twice on 2 Mega Evolution Pokemon and you win the game. Having to do this 3 times to take out EXs or 6 times to take out single prizers is a nightmare. But if you only have to do this twice, that seems pretty reasonable. I still think that this deck is going to have challenges. It's a stage 2 Pokemon, still gonna be a challenge to get all of that energy out of the board and get it back into your hand. 6 is a lot to have in your hand for each attack. But I think especially as we enter a 3 prize format with those new Mega Evolution Pokemons, this becomes a lot more viable. Electivire EX is a stage 1 lightning type Pokemon with 280 HP and 4 retreat. This thing is going to be very difficult to move around the board. And it has 2 attacks. Dual Bolt for a lightning and a colorless does 50 damage to 2 of your opponent's Pokemon. Having Snipe is nice, but 50 feels a little too short of the numbers that you'd really want to hit. If you're trying to take out those basic evolution Pokemon, you probably want 70, but that would be too broken. I get that for only 2 energy. 50 is probably reasonable, but it's just not hitting the numbers you really wanted to hit. And then its second attack is very it's kind of a callback to the tag team days. High Voltage Press for a 2 lightning and a colorless does 180 damage, and if this Pokemon has at least 2 extra energy attached in addition to this attack's cost, this attack does 100 more damage. So these sort of qualifiers of if you have this additional amount of energy, I love the fact that it's coming back. It does give these cards an extra level of nuance that would be, I think, ultimately valuable to the game. But this attack, like, having to get 5 energy on an Electivire, it's not necessarily impossible. We still have Electric Generator in the format. We do have Magneton to accelerate 3 energy, and at that point you're swinging for 280 damage, which is a really good number for taking out all of the big basics in the game, as well as a number of stage 1 EXs as well. I kind of wish this was 4 energy instead of 5 to get the 280, just to make it a little more realistic, but 5 energy is tough. Again, not impossible for a Miradon deck, but tough. I do see this players at least experimenting with this card. Miradon post-rotation is looking really bad. In Japan, it's done basically nothing, and it's really floundering without a solid attacker. I feel like if this was 4 energy instead of 5, this would be the play. With 5 energy, it's going to be tough. Manectric is a stage 1, 120 HP, Zap Kick for a colorless does 30 damage, and then its second attack, Flash Impact for a lightning and a colorless does 120 damage, and you also do 40 damage to one of your benched Pokemon. 120 for 2 is not bad. Doing damage to yourself is pretty bad. I don't think this is worth it, but 120 on a stage 1, especially if you go first and you get your second attachment, you blow out a basic Pokemon or even a stage 1, and maybe you damage like a super bulky Pokemon that you can either heal or it's just not going to matter. Could be kind of cool, but I don't see this one getting much play. I don't think Rotom's particularly good, but at least it has some interesting attacks. The first one is Astonish, which does 20 damage, and you choose a random card from your opponent's hand. Your opponent reveals that card and shuffles it into their deck. Very annoying for your opponent to deal with, and there could be some really nasty combos where you shorten their hand, and then you use Astonish to like send that last card back into their hand or back into their deck, and then they're screwed. There might be some combos like that, but I don't think there's enough. You're not doing enough damage with this to really make it worthwhile. I don't want to completely write it off. Could be kind of cool if you play the right combo to really take advantage of shortening your opponent's hand in this way. The second attack, Gadget Show for 2 colorless energy, does 30 damage for each Pokemon tool attached to all of your Pokemon. You could do even more if you've got the Area 0 Underdepths in play, but it's probably not realistic to get this going. Like, you have to find so many tools, and that's going to clog up your deck, and you put them on all your Pokemon. I don't necessarily see this realistically being a viable attack, but it's at least something that gave me a chuckle here. And I can see how someone could build a deck around this, and maybe for the memes, we give it a shot. Rapidash has the ability Hurried Gate, where once during your turn, you may draw a card. If you've got multiple Rapidashes in play, you can draw multiple cards. I'm not sure how strong of a draw engine this is, but post-rotation, this might be okay. I do like the fact that you can play this in any deck to add a draw engine to your deck, and at 110 HP, it's not necessarily the easiest. It's not going to be like sniped out pretty easily by like a Dragapult deck or anything like that. So this could be playable. I'm not sure. Like just drawing a singular card doesn't feel like quite enough, but I am welcome to the option, like just welcome to the idea of more draw engines being added to the game. Misty Starmie has the attack Sudden Flash for 1 water energy, does 60 damage, and if this Pokemon evolved from Misty Star you during this turn, this attack does 80 more damage. A single prize attacker in this deck, which is it's entirely single prize cards. Misty's unfortunately not getting an EX card, but for 140 damage for 1 energy on a single prize is not that bad, especially since Gyarados' attack, where you're discarding the top 7 cards of your deck, can be kind of wonky in terms of the damage that you're doing. So Starmie to clean up potential initial damage on a bigger Pokemon could be nice. Also just gives you more Pokemon to discard with Gyarados for Gyarados' big attack. Misty's Lapras is a very situational Pokemon. Turn 1, going second, I do like the Swim Together attack, which lets you search your deck for up to 3 Misty's Pokemon, reveal them, and put them into your hand. This is a deck that does require a lot of setup, and Misty's Lapras does help with that. However, I don't necessarily think it's the best. It might not even be the best way to set up a Misty deck. You might just be fine with Buddy Poffins and other ways of searching Pokemon, but I don't hate Misty's Lapras, especially because you can just use this as discard fodder for the Gyarados to attack. Cynthia's Milotic feels a bit underwhelming. For a water and a colorless, Aqua Split does 60 damage and 30 damage to 2 of your opponent's bench Pokemon. 30 is not great. You're not really one-hit KOing anything or softening anything up in a meaningful way. So it does feel like kind of a waste, especially because we have the Garchomp that we could be playing in the Cynthia shell instead, which looks much better. Floatzel's a stage 1, 120 HP, has 2 attacks. Whirlpool for 2 colorless energy does 30 damage, and you discard an energy from your opponent's active Pokemon. That could be kind of annoying, especially against certain decks where they don't run a lot of energy or energy recovery. yeah, that could be okay. And its second attack, Aqua Splash, for a water and 2 colorless, does 140 damage, and during your next turn, this Pokemon can't attack. Of course, you could just retreat out the Floatzel after you do this attack and then bring it back in to swing for 140 again. But ultimately, I don't think we're going to see much play with this Floatzel because I don't think it's good enough for the current meta. Dondozo EX is thick. It is a basic water Pokemon with 260 HP and 4 retreat cost. It's got 2 attacks. First one, Tsunami Reversal, for a water and a colorless, does 30 damage and 10 more damage for each damage counter on this Pokemon. So under normal conditions, if your opponent somehow gets you to 250 damage, you can swing for 280, which is enough to one-hit KO most of the stage 1 EXs in the game. However, your likelihood of being able to hit meaningful numbers with this attack is going to vary heavily by how much damage your opponent is putting on you. So I feel like this move is going to be very situational at best, and your opponent does have ways of playing around this. And then its second attack, for 2 water and 2 colorless, Dynamic Drive, does 120 damage, and you may do 120 more damage. If you do this, Pokemon also does 50 damage to itself. So you have to do 50 to yourself to do 240. Like 240 is better. You're going to be one-shotting stuff like Raging Bolt, but then also doing 50 damage to yourself, which brings you down to 210, which is pretty easy for a lot of decks to one-hit KO. I don't like this attack, and I don't think I like Dondozo at all. Also, 4 energy is a lot to power up. And yes, technically you could play Baxcalibur with this, but at that point, I would just rather play Chen Pao and have the opportunity to one-hit KO everything versus Dondozo, which is capped out at 240. Ethan's Sudowoodo is mostly a meme, but it could be a funny one. Impound, for 1 fighting energy, does 20 damage, and during your opponent's next turn, the defending Pokemon can't retreat. We have seen cards like this do very well in recent years, as players tend to not play that many switch cards, and you can trap a support Pokemon that can attack into the active with something like this, and you pair it with Monkey Dory to move the damage from whatever you're trapping onto their bench Pokemon, and you could be very much annoying your opponents to a win. And then its second attack, for 2 colorless energy, attempt Mimicry, flip a coin. If heads, choose one of your opponent's active Pokemon's attacks and use it as this attack. This is, but besides the fact that you're relying on a coin flip to even swing at all, you might be up against a Pokemon that has a terrible attack. You might be up against one that has an amazing attack, and you one-shot them and all is good. I think this card is basically just a meme, but it can be fun. Mudsdale has an ability that lets it take 30 less damage from attacks. It's a stage 1, and it has the attack Heavy Impact for 130 damage. I think that generally speaking, I would say this is not a good card, but maybe in the world where we're headed later with the Mega Lucario EX that can accelerate 3 energy, as well as the Power Tablet equivalent for fighting Pokemon, where you could actually boost this damage up, maybe this becomes a more viable single prize attacker in a Mega Lucario EX deck. Probably not, but it is theoretically possible now that Mega Lucario and that fighting power boost is going to be in the game later on in the future. Arven's deck is disappointing, to say the least, with Mabostov just not hitting for enough damage, and its healing I don't think is going to be enough to compensate. I was kind of hopeful that maybe Arven's Toedscruel fixes that a little bit. It's a stage 1, 140 HP, and it has 2 colorless attacks. Pull lets you switch one of your opponent's bench Pokemon to the active spot. You don't even get to hit it as a follow-up, you just pull it into the active. And then its second attack, Reckless Charge, for 3 colorless energy, does 120 damage, and this Pokemon also does 30 damage to itself. This is not good. Tauros has 2 attacks, Horn Attack for 30 damage and 1 colorless energy, and then Clean Hit for 2 colorless energy does 50 damage, and if your opponent's active Pokemon is an evolution Pokemon, this attack does 50 more damage. Theoretically, you could like one-shot a Charmeleon or something like this, but I can't really see a good use case beyond that for this Tauros. MC's Hype is a new supporter as part of this upcoming Heatwave Arena / Destined Rival set. Lets you draw 2 cards, and if your opponent has 3 or fewer prize cards remaining, draw 2 more cards. I don't think this is particularly good. The only deck that maybe wants to run this is Tinkaton, that wants to have a ton of cards in hand for their big attack, but otherwise there are better draw supporters you could be playing besides this one. Judge is getting a reprint, and we know how Judge works. Each player shuffles their hand into their deck, draws 4 cards. Really good card, but there's something here beneath the surface. Well, just at the bottom left-hand corner, right? We get new art, which is cool, but its tournament marking is still G. if Pokemon was going to go through the effort of making, like, reprinting Judge with new art, this would also be the time to update the tournament marking so that it is legal for years to come. But because this is still G, that pretty much confirms that in the next rotation that's happening in 2026, Judge is not coming back, even though we got a new reprint that is coming out very soon, which is kind of a confusing move, but oh well. There we go. That is a look at the last of the Heatwave Arena cards. I think some of those definitely have potential, and at the very least, the Shaman will be a card that sees a lot of play going forward, and I do think the Yanmega has a lot of potential too. But for now, I gotta get going. Thank you so much for watching. Unfortunately, my tech is broken right now. I can't do the flashy thing where I have the graphics come up. You can find me on all the things: YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram at In3rdPerson. You can find me on Twitch at In3rdPerson, where I stream the Pokemon trading card game every Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern time. Unfortunately, I missed this past Sunday because I messed up my foot, and it still hurts, and I've had to cut this video a lot so you guys aren't seeing me writhe in pain. Just flat foot issues. It's an ongoing thing. And check out the website in3rdperson.com for more articles and videos on video games, board games, and other nerdy pursuits. So until the next one, I'll see you later. How do I do this without my buttons? Where is it? Here it is. Bye-bye. I still got the air horn, but I can't drop the bomb, so...